Good morning, lords and ladies. Welcome back to A Morning with the Lord. Today is the 24th of the 11th, 2021, a Wednesday. Another fine morning here again in the New England. Soggy and damp, as it should be. Now, I've got a whole heap of stories lined up for us today. It seems to have been a fairly busy news day yesterday. Before we totally get into the reading of the stories, I've got one short video here which is about some Germans rescuing 100 Libyan migrants. Now I thought I'd just ring this up, seeing as we have been discussing, I don't know if it's the Libyan migrants, but the Belarus and Poland border issues with Germany. I'm pretty sure when we last were talking about it, Germany had made a statement that they weren't going to allow in any migrants. But that was under COVID reasons, and it seems the last couple of days the world has been laxing on them since the World Health Organization came out and said something. So let's just have a quick listen here and see what this story has to say. The German NGO see 100 people, migrants were packed in a small wooden boat. The NGO ship Sea-Watch with more than 100 migrants and yet to be granted safe port. More than 60,000 migrants have disembarked in Italy. Okay, my apologies. I thought that was going to be an actual story, not just a video. It's 60,000 migrants in Italy. I find that surprising because I don't know about around the world, but in Australia here, especially when COVID first hit, Italy was constantly being reported as the worst off and having some of the highest numbers and worst deaths. They were in a total point of emergency. It seems like they must have come out the other end of it for them to be taking in 60,000 migrants. Or did they not have a choice? But anyway, I will leave a link to that video. Go and check it out. It is only a minute long, and you can see the sort of conditions that these migrants are in. There was a small wooden boat, large enough to handle the ocean, but just a dinghy, no cover on it, and they were packed to the brim. There was no room to move on that thing. So, yes. And there we go. Now, I've got a few stories here from Australia, but before we do that, I think there's another one here relating to international. The title of this story is Controversial AUK-US Alliance to be the subject of a Parliament inquiry. And if you don't know, Australia backed out of a deal with France to instead go into a submarine deal with the US, and it has caused a lot of tension between us and France, which is what this story is regarding. So let's have a read here. A Parliament committee headed by Liberal MP Dave Sharma will hold an inquiry into the $90 billion submarine deal between Australia, the US and the UK. Australia's involvement in the controversial AUK-US Security Pact will be put under the spotlight by a parliamentary committee. The Joint Standing Committee on Treaties will hold an inquiry into the AUK-US alliance between Australia, the United States and the United Kingdom. The agreement will allow Australia to access nuclear submarine technology. Defence Minister Peter Dutton formally signed the agreement on Monday alongside top diplomats from the UK and the US. The committee's chair, Liberal MP Dave Sharma, said the agreement would allow access to critical information with security partners. It will help determine the optimal pathway for acquiring nuclear-powered submarines for the Royal Australian Navy, one of the most important strategic military capabilities for Australia in the decades ahead, he said. The pact came under heavy criticism from the French government after Australia favoured the nuclear-powered vessels over a $90 billion submarine contract with the European power. French President Emmanuel Macron publicly accused Prime Minister Scott Morrison of lying about the deal. A public hearing will be held on November 29. Now, we've been covering this, I've been reading these stories sort of since the beginning of this show, because it's been going on for a little while. And I think it's an important goings on in the world. Now, there's something that not a lot of people know, but it is common knowledge, but, not a lot of people look into this. But I have spent a lot of time watching the History Channel and various documentaries on good old World War II. Now, after World War II, when America was brought in, they signed a deal, or we all signed a deal with America, that America would inherit all of the UK and I think it was mainly just the UK, I'm not sure about France and other European nations. But the Americans inherited all of the UK's offshore military bases. That's why we have American military bases here in Australia rather than UK, even though we're part of the Commonwealth and not independent. And I think it would not surprise me if this sort of has something in relation to that, because we have very close ties diplomatically and whatnot with America, and since that occurrence on World War II, America is, our global sort of superpower. We gave them all the army bases, so from then on they were basically head of the military. So it wouldn't surprise me if under these sort of agreements that we might have, there might have been some loophole that America could come in and we would have to favour them over any other type of deals we have going. Now, that's just a theory, don't quote me on that, but I think it's sort of interesting. And like I argued when first talking about this, I don't understand why we couldn't do both. I mean, a $90 billion submarine contract was only good for us, and then America came in and wanted to do their own submarine deal with us, or whatever the hell it is that is going on. I think maybe the French submarines were diesel, and the ones we're building now with America are nuclear. But I'm not 100%. But I don't understand why we couldn't have just done both. I mean, it was it would have only helped us out. But then, that could come down to maybe we're capped at a certain amount of submarines with those deals, because that's why Australia only has a defence force, and we never, went into having an army, and that's why Japan has capped military limits and all that sort of thing, is because of the result of the end of World War II. So there could be some sort of red tape that screwed that whole deal over. But then at the same time, as we've read, the French were the ones who funded the China's Wuhan labs, and as soon as the Wuhan labs were constructed, China kicked France out, and next thing you hear about them having, research agreements with the US. Now, if the US has been going around kicking France out of places, and we backed them up on that, it's no wonder France has the shits with us. But it'd be interesting to see what the public hearing comes out with on November 29 anyway. That's 5 days from now. So yes, that's that story. Now, moving on to the next one. Let's see here. Okay, so the next story is in relation to the visa program. And we were talking about this on yesterday's podcast because there was a report about the government bringing in a new visa for Asian workers, and it was being called into question because we still have all these Pacific work visa programs going, and we have over 55,000 workers waiting to come in. But the reason we reported on this yesterday was because I'm pretty sure the day before that there was a report talking, or it might have even been yesterday as well, but there was a report talking about how the Pacific Islands and up through there have a really terrible vaccination rate. Now, today is an article talking about overhauls to that Pacific Worker Program. Now, the title of it here is Government Overhauls Pacific Worker Program Amid Concerns of Exploitation. So let's just have a read here and see what the go is. It says, the federal government is moving to streamline the program, which it claims will help better address workforce shortages while ensuring stronger worker protections. Australia's recruitment of workers from Pacific Island nations is being overhauled amid exploitation concerns and a contentious government campaign to stop workers absconding from their jobs. The federal government has announced the recruitment scheme will be streamlined in a move it says will help the program better address workforce shortages and ensure workers are protected. The decision will see the Seasonal Worker Program and Pacific Labour Scheme consolidated under a single stream known as the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme, or PALM, from April 2022. In a statement from Foreign Minister Maurice Payne, the Minister for the Pacific, Zed Seselja, spelled SESELJA. The government said the revised PALM scheme would benefit employers and workers. The improved PALM scheme will feature new program and visa settings while providing stronger worker protections and delivering streamlined processes and administrative efficiencies. The statement read in part. The changes follow a spotlight on the treatment of Pacific workers under the scheme, with human rights lawyers preparing a class action against labour hire companies accused of wage theft. The federal government has also come under fire over its distribution of poster aimed at dissuading Pacific Islander workers from fleeing their jobs under the program. The campaign had warned Pacific Island workers they could bring shame to their family's reputation and risk having their visa cancelled if they left their jobs. And it has a picture here of the poster. Now there's too much writing to read it, but it has a couple of bullet points. It says, risk and consequences of absconding, your visa may be cancelled, your employer will stop arranging payment of your health insurance, no guaranteed accommodation, no welfare support, and so on and so on. And this is like, the problem with all these things is you have dicks everywhere. There are plenty of people who are willing to rip off the system and have these people out on their properties working for them and whatnot, and having them, treat them like shit. But I would imagine a lot of these sort of programs would go through companies like Costa Exchange, big companies, but as we know, the farmers are still subcontractors under themselves type thing. But it goes both ways. Like, there are plenty of young people who come over, and just because they're here on under certain rules, they're still young and dumb, And working in the picking industry, especially if you're getting paid, depending on how much you pick, there's a lot of room there to make mistakes and arguments and all sorts of stuff. We're continuing to read here. Almost 19,000 people from countries including Vanuatu, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, and East Timor are in Australia as part of the recruitment of Pacific workers. And there's 55,000 more waiting in the wings. It says each year thousands of people are brought to Australia through the program to work mostly on farms picking fruit and vegetables. The government says the new scheme, to be run by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, will extend the upper time limit for visas to up to 4 years from 3. It would also grant a 9-month visa stay period to all seasonal workers, including those with an initial contract for a shorter period of work. Seasonal workers would also be able to apply onshore for long-term visa, where they have been identified by their employer as suitable for ongoing work. That's another thing when they can totally, blackmail people. It's like, you do it or you'll lose your visa. Anyway, continuing. The government says under the revised program, workers would also be able to move between employers more easily to better meet workforce needs and maximise their earnings. The Australian Workers' Union has raised concern over a number of employers under the Pacific Labour Scheme and Seasonal Worker Program offering substandard wages and conditions. Agriculture Minister David Littleproud has described the problem as a small cohort in the industry who do the wrong thing, who the government is trying to weed out. The government has also said the streamlining of Pacific recruitment program will deliver enhanced worker protection and support. It says this will include robust vetting of employers and an active monitoring compliance and assurance program, education programs, as well as a 24/7 helpline for workers to protect welfare. The government says its overhaul of the scheme follows industry calls for a more streamlined approach, which will see it adopt a central IT platform for employers and Pacific governments. Its introduction also comes after the announcements of a new agricultural visa targeting workers from the Asian nations this year. The government is banking on the number of Pacific workers in the country increasing as it seeks to address workforce shortages caused by COVID-19 border closure. And then it just says there's 55,000 people across the Pacific who have been approved to take up jobs. So there's 19,000 here now. There's 55,000 more waiting. So why the Asian one? It'd be interesting to see just if there is any more developments along that. Like I said, there have been reports of low COVID vaccination rates, but if the people have already been approved, it makes you wonder, have they been approved of that or not? Okay, last story of the day here. Okay, so the final story I'm going to touch on today is about some New South Wales. I'll read you the title. New South Wales passes common sense affirmative consent bill after advocacy work of Saxon Mullins. Now we'll read on here. New South Wales has passed the affirmative consent bill, which requires people to say or do something to confirm their partner consents to a sexual activity. Just a warning, this article contains references to sexual assault. 8 years after Saxon Mullins says she was raped in a Sydney alleyway, the New South Wales Parliament has introduced laws to change the standard of sexual consent. Attorney General Mark Speakman paid tribute to Miss Mullins' extraordinary bravery and tireless advocacy after the affirmative consent legislation on Tuesday cleared its final hurdle. Miss Mullins endured 2 trials and 2 appeals after she says she was raped in an alleyway behind King's Cross nightclub by a man she'd met only minutes earlier. A judge ultimately found that while Miss Mullins, in her own mind, had not consented, the man had no reasonable basis for believing she didn't. Within 24 hours of sharing her story through the ABC's Four Corners program in 2018, Mr. Speakman sparked a review of the laws, which led to the changes passed in Parliament on Tuesday. It's a day Miss Mullins never could have imagined when she first publicly told her story, she told AAP. It does feel nice on one hand, she said. It would never I would never have dreamed that something like this could happen. Then on the other hand, obviously I wish nobody in Australia knew my name. Under the new laws, people have to say or do something to confirm their partner consents to a sexual activity. Otherwise, they could be guilty of sexual assault. Two amendments were added to the bill in the upper house, which include clarifying that cognitive or mental health impairments must be a substantial cause for failing to seek consent, as well as writing into laws the terms and timelines for a review. Mr. Speakman says the common sense reforms will simplify the law and ensure more effective prosecutions of sexual offences. No law can ever erase the trauma of sexual assault, but we have listened to calls for change and consulted with victim survivors and legal experts to improve our response to sexual violence, he said. What the new law doesn't do, as some have feared, is make consensual sex illegal. It does not require a written agreement or script or stifle spontaneity. It's a matter of common sense and respect, Mr. Speakman said. Under our reforms, if you want to engage in sexual activity with someone, then you need to do or say something to find out if they want to have sex with you too. It's that simple. Judges, legal practitioners and police will receive targeted education programs on the new legislation before it comes into effect mid-next year. There will also be new directions for juries to address common misconceptions in sexual assault cases, community awareness campaigns, and research into the experiences survivors have had with the criminal justice process. Ms. Mullins said the next steps are just as critical as the legislation itself. If we change the law, nothing's actually going to change. If we just change the law, nothing's actually going to change, she said. We need to have those community attitudes change as well, and so everything that goes along with it is so important. Next on the list for Miss Mullins, now a Director for Rape and Sexual Assault Research and Advocacy, is securing the same reforms in other states and improving the education around consent in schools across the nation. It says here, if you or someone you know is impacted by sexual assault, call 1-800-RESPECT, that's 1-800-737-732, or visit 1-800-respect.org.au, and in an emergency, call 000. So there you go. There's new laws. Now I have absolutely no idea what the laws were before, but isn't it... Well, obviously, if this lady couldn't even get her case heard, or couldn't, after 2 appeals, still failed her case, the laws must have been swaying in the wrong direction. But under, what they say there is if, there just has to be some type of verbal consent, and you won't need a written consent or a transcript of the conversation to go like to that sort of length. But in all honesty, I think that would even be better, because what that proposes is a lot of leeway. And obviously, like I said, if that lady couldn't get her, if she failed her appeals, there must have been a lot of leniency in the other way. But perhaps, yeah, it's such a hard thing, because when human nature and laws are in place, there's going to be a lot of overlap. People are animals. People are fucking pigs. The majority. Well, everyone, I should say. Yeah, especially when intoxicated. This is something that, it's, yeah. I understand the type of trauma that can cause. It's a hard thing, and like I said just before, if anybody is affected, 1-800-RESPECT. That's 1-800-737-732, or visit 1-800-RESPECT.org.au. In emergency, call 000. But yes, keep that in mind. And if it's in the back of the mind, hopefully, it will help. It's like they say, this is a terrible analogy, I know, but I just mean, it's like with speed cameras. The more people that can see the speed cameras, the more people slow down. The more people are aware of these sort of rules, the more people should hopefully slow down and think about them. Anyway, lords and ladies, I am going to leave this podcast there. I thank you all for joining me. You've been listening to A Morning with the Lord. I, as always, am your lovable host, Lord Duffield. And until next time, have a lovely day.